We boarded the coach from our hotel about 6 a.m. and being amongst the first on board, took up the seat behind the driver for a good view out of the front window. After picking up more tourists from other hotels, we set off in the direction of Kakadu National Park and settled down for the long drive on the Arnhem Highway to Jabiru, 249 kilometres away.
Our driver constantly kept us informed about the history of the land and the various types of country we were passing through. Eucalyptus and paper barks were fairly common in the early stages along this highway. About 8 a.m. we stopped at Corroboree Park for a spot of breakfast. While there we booked a flight over Kakadu Landscape and Jim Jim and Twin Falls for later in the morning. Coming up to the wetlands, we passed onto the river floodplains, where a lot of water spreads out over the open country during the wet season.
While having breakfast, a convoy of army trucks came through and left Corroboree Park ahead of the coach. It took some time to pass through the line of trucks after we started off. Down the track, notices on the fence advised us that some of the country on our right was army training ground, and it appeared this was where the convoy was headed. The geography of the country was continually changing, from pockets of low bushland to areas of floodplains and lowlands. Controlled burning was in evidence at the side of the road. Fire is important to the Aboriginal people. It is used to clean up the country, making hunting easier, and encourages new growth for grazing animals.
As we approached Jabiru, 8 of us left the coach and boarded a small bus which took us to the airport for our flight over Kakadu and the edge of the Arnhem Land Escarpment. With others from another coach tour group, we boarded one of 4 Cessna aircraft which headed out over Jabiru and turned south for a 1-hour flight across this varied terrain. At liftoff, we could see the distant hills at Ranger Uranium Mine. The town of Jabiru appeared almost directly below our aircraft. This town was originally built to house the workers at the mine. Very soon we were looking down on some of the low-lying floodplains areas where plant and animal life exist in abundance. During the dry season, the water in the rivers recedes and billabongs appear across the landscape.
Our pilot was kept busy, keeping an eye out for the other planes in the area. We were supplied with headsets, through which we were given a running commentary of the country below. Kakadu is an ecologically and biologically diverse land. There are 6 major landforms in the park, from estuaries and tidal flats to floodplains, hills and basins, stone country and outliers. Outliers are essentially pieces of the Arnhem Land Plateau which have become separated by erosion. It is thought they were islands in the ancient seas that once covered Kakadu.
By now we were approaching the escarpment at Jim Jim Falls. This red ochre ground rises to a height of 330 metres above the plains. Deep crevasses in the rocky ground could be clearly seen from our aircraft. Creeks have etched deep gullies in the rock surface, forming gorges. Patches of sand and leafy matter have enabled small pockets of woodland to develop.
We caught sight of the rim of the escarpment ahead, and as we flew over, the pilot banked to the right to get in position to view Jim Jim Falls. Flying back from the opposite direction enabled Judy to snap a still photo from the other side of the plane. Leaving the area of Jim Jim Falls, we headed south to view Twin Falls. We flew 2 circuits to the right in front of Twin Falls, enabling us to get a good view of this waterfall. Flying back in the opposite direction gave Judy the opportunity to photograph the falls with her still camera.
Leaving the falls behind, we headed for Cooinda Lodge, where we were to take a boat cruise on the Yellow Water Billabong. The land we were now flying over was lowland country. The rivers were drying up and several billabongs were clearly evident on the landscape. The lowlands make up nearly 70% of the park. The soils are shallow and often overlie extensive sheets of ironstone and a thick profile of strongly leached rocks.
Approximately half of the land in Kakadu is owned by Aborigines under the Aboriginal Land Rights Northern Territory Act 1976. Most of the remainder of the park is currently under claim by Aboriginal people. The traditional owners of the park descended from various clan groups in the area and have long-standing affiliation with the country.
On arrival at the Cooinda airstrip, we had to leave the aircraft quickly, rejoin our group and board the boat for the cruise of the Yellow Waters Billabong. Kakadu is home to about 280 species of Australian birds. Our first sighting was of several magpie geese feeding among the reeds just off the side of the main water. Yellow Waters is famous for the bird life that gathers there in the dry season. There was not a great abundance the day we were there, as there was still quite a lot of water in Kakadu and the birds had not yet migrated to this large water oasis. Quietly perched in a grove of pandanus trees and completely ignoring our presence was this rufous night heron.
All that grass that's out to the left-hand side there, that's way out across as far as the eye can see there, that's...
A little further along was a pied heron perched on a branch at the water's edge.
Much rather if you can catch them on the way down.
A darter was drying out his wings in the warm sun.
I have actually seen these birds.
This expanse of water is part of the South Alligator floodplain. From our bird book, we see that the jacana, or Jesus bird, as it is sometimes called because it appears to walk on water, has long legs and extraordinarily long toes and claws. We came close to a small family of these delicate-looking creatures walking on lily pads. They seemed to be unconcerned about our presence.
As we moved across the water, patches of blue water lily pads surrounded the sides of the boat.
Common name is blue water lily, although some of you see are white, some of them purple, some of them some of them
A white-bellied fishhawk viewed us with suspicion from the safety of a branch above. We spotted a crocodile basking on the side of the billabong in the shade of a tree. This was the only one we saw that day. Some lone jabberoos were idling away their time in the reeds at the water's edge. High up in the top of a tree, a pair of jabberoos were busy making their nest. By now it was time to head back to Coinda Lodge for lunch, and the end of this the first stage of our tour of Kakadu National Park. In part 2, we will visit Nulangi Rock, the Jabberoo area and Ubea.